I wasn't looking for anyone when I joined the book club. Honestly, I didn't even want to be there. My friend Maya signed me up without asking. "You need to meet people who aren't coworkers or Tinder disasters," she'd said, typing away on her laptop while I sat on her couch with a beer and a defeated expression. "Just go to one meeting. If it sucks, I'll never bug you again." It didn't suck, but it wasn't what I expected either. The book club met every other Thursday at this cozy, slightly overpriced cafe downtown. The kind of place with exposed brick walls, string lights, and baristas who looked like they'd be mad if you ordered anything with whipped cream. I got there a few minutes late, which I hate, and walked in trying not to look as out of place as I felt. The back room was full, maybe 10 or 12 people, mostly women, all scattered around a long communal table. Everyone looked up when I walked in, and for a split second I felt like I'd crashed a baby shower by accident. Then someone waved me over. I recognized her from the event email. Claire, the organizer, probably early 40s, glasses on her head, a notebook full of sticky notes, and a mild, "let's not let this spiral into chaos" vibe. "We were just getting started," she said, motioning to the empty chair beside her. "Glad you made it." I nodded, muttering thanks, and slid into the seat, pulling out the worn copy of the bell jar I'd shoved into my backpack earlier that morning. I didn't want to speak yet. I just wanted to sit, listen, and ride it out. That's when I noticed him. Across the table. Black t-shirt, silver ring on his right hand, slightly overgrown hair that curled at the ends. He was leaning back in his chair, legs stretched out casually like he didn't care he was taking up too much space. His copy of the book was dog-eared and covered in scribbled notes. He was the only other guy there, and nothing about him fit. He didn't look like someone who'd be in a book club voluntarily. He looked like the kind of guy who owned multiple leather jackets and never replied to emails. He looked like he might be in a band, or maybe used to be, and didn't like to talk about it. When Claire asked everyone to go around and introduce themselves, he just said, "I'm Wes," and gave a little wave like he was doing her a favor. Wes. Of course his name was Wes. The discussion started, and I tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting toward him. Every time someone made a point, he'd react, smirking, nodding slightly, scribbling something in the margins of his book. When he finally spoke, it wasn't what I expected. He didn't ramble or try to sound smarter than he was. He just said, "I think the parts where she talks about being underwater aren't about dying. It's about not feeling. And that's scarier to her than death." The table went quiet. Claire raised an eyebrow. "Interesting?" she said. "Say more about that?" He shook his head. "That's it. She's more afraid of being numb than being gone." Then he went back to doodling in the corner of his notebook like he hadn't just said something that was going to live rent-free in my head for a week. I don't remember much of what anyone else said after that. When the meeting wrapped up, I lingered near the table, pretending to check my phone while people filtered out. I wasn't sure what I was waiting for. Wes was the last to stand. He looked over at me and raised an eyebrow. "You gonna say something or just stare?" My face went hot. "Sorry, what you said about the book was... I liked it." He shrugged. "Thanks. You always come to this thing?" "Sometimes. Depends on the book." "You liked the bell jar?" "I don't know if 'liked' is the word," he said, slipping the book into his bag. "But I got something out of it." I nodded. "Cool." He gave me a look, half amused, half curious. "You knew?" "Yeah. First time." "Well, welcome to the club, man. It gets less awkward after the third meeting." "You come that often?" he smirked. "What can I say? I like reading sad books and judging people's takes on them." I laughed before I realized I was doing it. Wes slung his bag over his shoulder. "You walking out or waiting for someone?" "Just avoiding the rain." He glanced toward the window. It's barely misting," I shrugged. "Still counts." He gave me a nod. "Later, book guy." "Later, Wes." I watched him walk out into the night like he had somewhere better to be. Like he always did. And maybe he did. But for the first time in a long while, I kind of wanted to find out. The next 2 weeks crawled by. I told myself I wasn't thinking about Wes. That I didn't keep replaying that one line he dropped like it was no big deal. That I wasn't checking the event email for the next book title just a little too often. But of course I was. We were reading A Little Life next. Heavy. Brutal. The kind of book that takes something out of you just to get through it. I was halfway in by the time the second Thursday rolled around, and I kept wondering what Wes would say about it. How he'd read between the lines. If he'd show up at all. I got to the cafe early. Not on purpose. I just didn't want to be late again. I ordered tea I wouldn't drink and picked the seat across from the one he'd taken last time. Just in case. The group trickled in slowly. Claire smiled when she saw me. A few of the regulars gave polite nods. No one said much. The energy was different tonight. Heavier. Then, right as Claire started to speak, the door opened, and there he was. Same black hoodie. Same don't give a shit walk. He didn't look around or say hi to anyone. Just dropped into the chair across from mine and pulled out his book, the cover already bent at the corners like it had lived in the bottom of his backpack for days. He caught me looking and raised an eyebrow. "You're early." "You're late." He smirked and leaned back. "Touché." Claire cleared her throat and the discussion started. It was slower this time. More hesitant. People were careful with their words. A Little Life didn't lend itself to casual conversation. There were long pauses. A lot of uncomfortable glances. And Wes? He was quiet, at first. Then someone brought up the abuse scenes and said, "I just don't understand why anyone would keep going back to people who hurt them." And Wes sat up straighter. "It's not about understanding," he said, voice low but steady. "It's about survival. You don't get to be logical when all you're trying to do is not fall apart." The room went still. I saw Claire glance at him, then at the rest of us, as if deciding whether to move the conversation forward or let it sit. She chose to move on. But my eyes stayed on him. When the discussion ended, Wes didn't linger this time. He stood, stuffed his book in his bag, and started heading for the door. I hesitated, then followed. He was already outside, lighting a cigarette just off to the side of the cafe. The night air was crisp, the sidewalk damp from earlier drizzle. "I didn't know you smoked," I said, stepping beside him. "I don't, usually." He took a drag and exhaled slowly. "Needed a minute." I nodded, not sure what to say. "Book hit a nerve?" I asked carefully. He let out a dry laugh. "You could say that." I leaned against the wall beside him, hands in my pockets. "You said something in there about survival." That was a good way to put it. He looked at me then, not smirking, not amused, just looking. "Ever have something happen that you don't talk about because you're not sure people would get it?" he asked. I shrugged. "Yeah, I think most people have, whether they admit it or not." Wes nodded slowly like he was thinking something over. Then he flicked his cigarette away and straightened up. "Want to get a drink?" I blinked. "Now?" "Why not? You seem like someone who could use one." I laughed. "Is that a compliment or an insult?" "Little bit of both," he said, already walking. The bar we ended up at was a few blocks down. Low lit, mostly empty, with sticky menus and a jukebox playing old Nirvana tracks. We sat in a booth by the window. Wes ordered whiskey neat. I got a beer I didn't really want. "So," he said, stretching his legs out again, like that was just his default setting. "What's your story, book guy?" I took a sip of my drink. "What do you want to know? Why you joined a book club?" "My friend made me." He raised an eyebrow. "Seriously?" "Yep. Said I needed to meet people who didn't work in tech and weren't emotionally unavailable on dating apps." He grinned. "Smart friend. What about you?" "Me? Yeah." "Why'd you join?" He looked down at his glass. "Ex-girlfriend. She used to drag me to stuff like this. Kept going after she left." I watched him for a second. There was more there. He wasn't saying it all, but I didn't push. We talked for a while, about books, mostly, but also about music and dumb jobs, and how overpriced that cafe was. He was sharp, funny, and kind of intense in a way that didn't feel forced. Like he didn't waste time with small talk unless it was actually going somewhere. At one point, he leaned back and looked at me with this curious tilt of his head. "You're not like most of the guys I've met. What's that supposed to mean?" He shrugged. "You don't talk just to fill the silence. You actually think before you speak." "I mean, thank you, I think." "Don't get a big head about it," I smiled. "No danger of that." We finished our drinks, and when the check came, he grabbed it before I could argue. "Next one's on you," he said, standing. "Is there gonna be a next one?" He looked at me for a beat, like he was trying to figure out if I was serious. Then he smiled. "Yeah, there is." The next time I saw Wes outside of book club was completely unplanned. I'd been standing in the nonfiction aisle of the indie bookstore near my apartment, trying to look busy while eavesdropping on a couple arguing softly over which travel memoir to buy. I heard someone laugh behind me, low, amused, and turned just in time to see him standing there, arms crossed, that familiar smirk tugging at his mouth. "You always read the backs of every book before picking one? Or is this some kind of public performance?" I rolled my eyes but smiled. "Some of us like to make informed decisions." Wes stepped closer, his eyes scanning the shelf. "Or you're stalling because you don't actually want to commit to reading a travel memoir." "I might." Doubtful." I shrugged. "Okay, fair." He picked up a copy of Into the Wild, flipped through it like he'd done it 100 times. "You free? There's a place around the corner with killer fries and decent coffee." It was a Wednesday, just after 6, and I had absolutely nothing going on. Still, I hesitated, like I needed to pretend I was busier than I was. But then I met his eyes, and that was enough. "Yeah," I said. "Sure." We ended up at this tiny cafe bar hybrid, half full of grad students and people typing furiously into laptops. The lighting was warm, the music soft and moody. We slid into a booth near the back, and Wes ordered a coffee while I went for fries and a cider. We split both without discussing it. That was kind of his thing. I noticed that. He didn't ask permission so much as move forward like your answer was already yes. Normally, that would have annoyed me, but with him, it felt oddly easy. "How long you been in the city?" he asked between bites. 3 years, I said. "Moved here after college. Got a job, stayed longer than I thought I would." He nodded. "That sounds resigned." I laughed. "No, I mean, I like it here. Mostly. It's just, I don't know. I thought I'd have more figured out by now." Wes made a face like he got it. "Yeah, I thought I'd be a published author by 24. Instead, I build temporary walls for corporate events and haven't written anything decent in 2 years." That surprised me. "You're a writer?" He shrugged. "Was. Kinda. Used to be obsessed with short stories. Then real life hit, and I got tired of writing about people who don't exist." "You're good at it, though. Reading people, I mean." He tilted his head, curious. "You think?" "You're observant. You pick up on stuff no one else does in those meetings." He didn't say anything for a second, just looked at me, eyes a little softer than usual. "Thanks," he said quietly. "Most people just think I'm a dick." "Why's that?" "Because I don't sugarcoat things. I don't smile if I don't mean it. And I'd rather sit in silence than talk about weather." Honestly, I respect that. He smiled again, this time less like a smirk, and more like a real smile. The kind that changed his whole face. "You surprise me, book guy. You keep saying that." "Yeah, well, you keep being surprising." There was something in his voice then. A pause, a shift. He held my gaze a little longer than usual, and I felt my stomach tighten in that way I hadn't felt in a while. Not from nerves, but anticipation. Like a moment was hanging in the air between us, and neither of us wanted to be the first to name it. But then the server came by with the check, and the moment passed. Outside, it had started to drizzle again, typical December. The streetlights made everything look gold and soft, like the whole block was part of a movie scene. We stood awkwardly by the curb, neither of us really making a move to leave. "I meant it," I said. What I said earlier. You're good at reading people. Wes looked at me for a beat, then shoved his hands into his pockets. Not always. Sometimes I miss stuff. I raised an eyebrow. Like, what? He was quiet for a second. Then, like whether someone actually wants me around, or if they're just being polite. Do I seem like I'm being polite? He studied me. No, you don't. Good. Another beat of silence. I could feel my heart thudding behind my ribs, stupidly loud. I'm gonna head back, he said finally. Got an early start tomorrow. Right, yeah. But he didn't leave right away. He lingered, like he wanted to say something else, but hadn't decided if it was a good idea. Finally, he took a small step closer. You coming to the next meeting? I nodded. Wouldn't miss it. He smiled again, barely there, and then turned, walking off into the misty dark like something out of a noir novel. I watched him go until he disappeared around the corner. Then I stood there a little longer than I probably should have, heart still racing, wondering what the hell I'd just gotten myself into. By the time the next book club meeting rolled around, I'd basically given up pretending I was going just for the books. I mean, I read the novel. We were on Earth We're Briefly Gorgeous, which was brutal and beautiful and hit a little too close to home in ways I didn't want to say out loud, but I'd be lying if I said that's what I was looking forward to most. It was Wes. He'd gotten under my skin in this quiet, relentless way. Not with grand gestures or flirtation. He wasn't like that, but just by being there, being present, thoughtful, real. I never had to guess what he was thinking, even when he didn't say much. There was this unspoken current between us now, subtle but unmistakable. I got to the cafe early again. Nervous energy had me tapping my pen against my book until Claire gently asked me to stop. The room filled slowly, and I kept pretending not to glance toward the door. When he walked in, 10 minutes late as usual, I swear I felt my shoulders relax. Wes gave me a nod as he took the seat across from me. His hair was damp from the rain, hoodie pushed back, and he looked tired in a way that wasn't just about sleep. But he still flashed a quick grin. Hey, he said. Hey. The discussion was heavier than usual. The book touched on trauma, identity, complicated family stuff. Things people usually tiptoe around in public. But this group had grown more open over time, more willing to say the uncomfortable things out loud. Wes was quieter than normal. He spoke only once, about halfway through, when someone mentioned the way the narrator talked about love, feeling like a wound. I think, Wes said slowly, sometimes love does feel like that. Not because it's broken, but because it opens something in you that doesn't know how to close again. No one said anything for a full 10 seconds after that. Claire eventually moved us along, but the mood in the room had shifted. It stayed quieter after that, more introspective. When it ended, people trickled out in pairs. I waited by the door, and Wes walked up without me needing to ask. Want to walk? He said. Always. We walked in the same direction we had a few weeks earlier, but slower this time. The air was crisp, but not too cold. The rain just a memory now. The streetlights cast long shadows. You okay? I asked eventually. He shrugged. Yeah, just tired. You sure? He gave me a side glance. Why? You worried about me? I held his gaze. Kind of. Wes looked away, stuffed his hands into his hoodie pocket. I had a weird week, he said. Family stuff. I nodded, not pushing. I saw my dad for the first time in 4 years, he said after a while, voice low. Oh. Yeah, it wasn't bad, just weird. He's not sick or anything. It wasn't a dramatic reunion. Just, he called out of nowhere. Said he wanted to get lunch. Did you go? I did. How was it? Wes gave a small laugh, humorless. It was like having lunch with a stranger who happened to know your childhood address. We talked about neutral things. Weather, work. He asked if I was seeing anyone. I raised an eyebrow. What did you say? I said no. I didn't respond right away. Would it have made a difference? I asked finally. If you had said yes, he shrugged. He probably would have nodded and said something awkward about being supportive. Sounds like a real gem, Wes chuckled. He's not evil, just unavailable. Always was. We walked in silence for a bit. Our arms brushed once, but neither of us moved away. I don't usually talk about him, he said. You don't have to talk about anything you don't want to. He glanced over. I know. That's kind of why I'm talking to you. Something tightened in my chest at that, not in a painful way. Just a sudden rush of heat, like I was being let into something most people didn't get to see. We reached the same bar as last time, without even discussing it. Inside, the music was softer, the booths more empty. He ordered whiskey again. I went for tea. My stomach was too tangled for alcohol. We didn't talk much at first. Just sat there, letting the quiet settle between us. It wasn't uncomfortable. Eventually, Wes spoke. I've been trying to figure you out, I blinked. Me? Yeah, you're calm, but you've got layers. You're not just some nice guy who reads literary fiction. I raised an eyebrow. What do you think I am then? He took a sip, then looked at me seriously. Someone who's careful with people because they've been careless with you. It hit harder than I expected. I looked down at my mug. Maybe, I said softly. Wes leaned in a little. You ever get tired of being careful? I looked up. Our eyes locked. Yeah, I said. All the time. He didn't say anything, but he didn't look away either. And there, in the dim light of that booth, I felt something shift. Not a grand moment. Not fireworks. Just a quiet recognition that we were both tired, that we were both still here, that maybe, just maybe, we'd stopped running long enough to see what was right in front of us. We didn't kiss that night. I kind of thought we would. There was this strange gravity between us, quiet but real. But Wes just walked me to the train station, hands stuffed in his hoodie, his shoulder bumping mine every few steps. When we got to the steps, he paused. This was good, he said, like he was checking with me before deciding it was true. Yeah, I replied. It was. There was a moment, eyes meeting, time stretching, but he didn't move. He just nodded once and said, "Text me when you get home," and walked off before I could say anything back. That was Wes. Intense 1 minute, guarded the next. Like he only let himself feel things in flashes before slamming the door shut again. I texted him, of course. He didn't reply right away, but the next morning I woke up to a simple, "Glad you came out. Hope you slept okay." It wasn't much, but it was enough. Over the next week, we settled into something that wasn't quite a routine. He'd send me a song out of nowhere with no explanation. I'd reply with a line from whatever book I was reading. Sometimes we didn't message for a day or two. Sometimes we sent 10 texts in an hour. There was no pressure, no rules, but it felt like something was building. The next book was Giovanni's Room, a classic. Also very, very gay. I wasn't sure if that was going to change the vibe in the group, but it did, in a good way. The conversation was looser, more honest. Like the book gave people permission to talk about things they'd normally keep to themselves. Wes was unusually engaged that night. He had thoughts, lots of them, and they weren't always polished or easy to follow, but they were raw and smart and very him. The whole book feels like guilt and longing and self-sabotage wrapped in beautiful sentences, he said at one point. It's not a love story, it's a war. Between who he wants to be and who he's allowed to be. Claire gave him a long look. You think people still feel that way? He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "Some do," and looked down at his hands. After the meeting, I didn't even have to ask. He just fell into step beside me as we walked out of the cafe and into the cold night. You hungry? He asked. I could eat. We ended up at his place this time. It wasn't what I expected. I'd pictured something half lived in, dishes in the sink, posters taped to the wall, furniture that didn't match. But it was clean, organized. warm in a way that felt intentional. There were books stacked on every surface, an old record player in the corner, a plant on the windowsill that looked like it was actually thriving. He threw his keys on the counter and started digging through the fridge. I've got leftover curry or toast. I could vibe with toast? He gave me a mock serious look. Then you're a cheap date. You're not even offering me wine. He smirked. You want wine? No, I want toast. Calm down. He made us both plates, and we ate on the couch, shoulders barely touching. The TV was on, but muted. Some old movie playing. Neither of us paid attention. At one point, I looked over and caught him watching me instead of the screen. What? He shook his head slightly. Nothing. I like having you here. My heart stuttered. I like being here. We sat in silence for a while after that. Not awkward, just full. Like the moment didn't need words. Then, without turning to me, he said, I think I'm scared to want this. I didn't respond right away. Me too, I said finally, but I still do. Wes turned toward me then. His expression was unreadable at first, like he was doing the math on what would happen next. Then he reached out and rested his hand on my knee. Just lightly. Not grabbing, not pulling, just there. It was the smallest thing, but it was everything. I didn't move, I didn't break the eye contact, and slowly, like he was checking with me every step of the way, he leaned in. Our foreheads touched first, then our noses, and finally, his lips brushed mine. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't choreographed or cinematic, it was tentative, almost shy, like neither of us wanted to admit how long we'd been waiting for it. But it was real. When he pulled back, he kept his hand on my leg. I'm not good at this, he said. Me neither. Cool. We sat there for a long time after that. Close, but not clinging. Just letting it happen, whatever it was. I didn't sleep over that night. Not because I didn't want to, but because Wes didn't ask. And I didn't want to assume. We just sat there on his couch until it was nearly 2 a.m., the movie long forgotten, his hand still on my leg, my fingers tracing invisible lines on the seam of his jeans. It wasn't sexual. Not even really romantic, not in the conventional sense. It just was. Steady, quiet, real. Eventually, I stood up, and Wes followed me to the door without saying much. He opened it slowly, like there was still a part of him that hadn't decided whether to let me go. Text me when you get home? He asked, voice low. I nodded. Yeah, of course. He leaned in, kissed the corner of my mouth, so softly it almost didn't count, and then stepped back like he needed to give me space, even if he didn't want to. I texted him from the sidewalk. Home safe. That was nice. He replied, You were nice. After that night, things shifted between us. Subtly, but definitely. He didn't start holding my hand in public or changing his relationship status or anything. He wasn't that guy. But he started looking at me longer when we were talking. Started showing up early to book club instead of late. Sometimes he'd brush his hand along my back as we passed through a doorway, or let his knee rest against mine under the table and not move away. And in texts, he changed too. Little more open, less cryptic. One night I got, what do you do when you can't stop overthinking something that hasn't even happened yet? I stared at it for a few minutes before replying, tell someone who won't try to fix it. Just listen. And after a pause, he wrote back, you're that person. We never defined what we were. Not at first, but on a random Thursday afternoon, I got a message from him that just said, my mom's in town this weekend. Want to get coffee with us? I stared at the screen for a long time. My stomach flipped in that weird way it does when you realize something's becoming real. I replied, yeah. Just tell me when and where. When I met his mom, I understood everything about him a little more. She was soft-spoken, but sharp. One of those women who could make you feel like she saw right through you, but in a gentle way. She greeted me with a warm smile, asked about my job, my favorite books, and whether I was the reason Wes has been in a suspiciously good mood lately. Wes groaned, but didn't deny it. We sat outside a cafe for an hour, and she kept smiling at him in that way only mothers do when they know their kid is a little happier than he was before. When she left, Wes and I walked a few blocks in silence. "She liked you," he said finally. "Yeah?" He nodded. "A lot." "Good," I said, trying not to grin too hard. "Because I like her kid." That made him pause in his step, just for a second. Then he caught up. Later that week, I stayed over for the first time. It wasn't planned. I'd gone over after book club. Neither of us stayed for the post-discussion chat, and we ended up lying on his bed side by side, legs tangled under the blanket, not even kissing. Just there. Around 1 a.m., he turned to me. "You don't have to go." I nodded, already half asleep. "I wasn't planning to." He let out a soft breath, then pulled me closer. I pressed my face into the curve of his neck and listened to his heartbeat. It was steady. Familiar. I woke up to sunlight through his blinds and the smell of coffee. Wes was in the kitchen, barefoot, shirtless, pouring 2 mugs like he did this all the time. Like, this was normal. "Hope you're okay with oat milk," he said, handing me a cup. "Is this a test?" He grinned. "Maybe." We spent the morning reading side by side on the couch, our feet brushing occasionally, the city coming alive outside his windows. It was simple, soft, easy, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. By January, it was a thing. Us, not boyfriends. Exactly. Not in the labeled Instagram post sort of way, but something solid, quiet, ours. We didn't tell the book club. Not on purpose. We weren't hiding it, but we also weren't performing it, and I think Wes liked it that way, having something just for himself. For us. Still, people noticed. One night, while I was browsing the bookshelf before the meeting started, Claire walked over and handed me a flyer for a local literary event. "You should bring your friend," she said, voice casual but eyes knowing. I tried to play dumb. "Which friend?" she smirked. "The one you keep staring at like he's about to disappear." I laughed, and she didn't push. Just walked away, leaving me holding the flyer and thinking how completely, painfully obvious I probably was. Wes, of course, found this hilarious. "She's not wrong," he said later when I told him. "You do stare at me like I'm a flight risk." "You are a flight risk," he shrugged. "Not anymore." That got me, more than I expected. Because part of me had been waiting for it to end. Waiting for him to ghost, to drift, to quietly decide it was too much and disappear. But he didn't. Instead, he started doing things like texting me poems in the middle of the day, showing up outside my building with coffee when he knew I had a deadline, letting me leave a toothbrush at his place without making it a thing. One night he reached across the table and linked our pinkies while we were eating takeout. "I don't say this stuff a lot," he said, eyes fixed on his noodles. "But I'm really glad I met you." I squeezed his hand. "Same," I said. "Even if you were kind of a dick the first time we met." He looked up, mock offended. "Kind of?" I grinned. "Fine, a massive dick." He laughed, and it made my chest feel full in the best way. Things weren't perfect. Sometimes he still pulled back without warning. Some nights, I'd wake up and feel him staring out the window like his mind had gone somewhere else entirely. There were things he hadn't told me, things about his past, his dad, the time he'd dropped out of school and never really gone back. But I didn't need him to explain everything. I just needed him to stay. And he did. February brought snow. Not a lot, just enough to turn the sidewalks slushy and coat the windows in that thin, magical frost that made everything feel quieter, softer. I stayed at his place more often than not. It was closer to the train, closer to the cafe, and, if I was being honest, closer to him. We hadn't talked about living together, not seriously, but it was starting to feel that way already. One Saturday morning, we were lying in bed, warm under the blankets, while the world outside looked like something out of a postcard. He was scrolling through something on his phone, and I had my head on his chest, listening to his heart like it was my favorite song. "You ever think about the future?" I asked, voice muffled against his skin. He looked down at me. Like flying cars? Or like us? I shrugged. Both? He set his phone down and wrapped an arm around me. I used to think I wouldn't make it past 30. Jesus. He chuckled. Not in a tragic way. Just, I didn't see anything past the mess I was in. But now? Now? He was quiet for a second. Then, now I think I'd like to have a backyard someday. A cat. Maybe a shitty car I fix up in the driveway on weekends. I looked up at him. That's the most domestic thing I've ever heard you say. Don't make it weird. I smiled and rested my head back on his chest. We didn't say I love you that day. Or even that week. But it was there. In the quiet. In the comfort. In the way he made 2 cups of coffee in the morning without asking if I wanted one. In the way he always pulled me back into bed when I tried to leave too early. A few days later, he came to the book club late, windblown and flushed, his hoodie soaked at the edges from the snow. I'd saved him his seat, like always, and when he sat beside me, he reached under the table and squeezed my thigh once, just enough to say, I'm here. After the meeting, Claire caught us both at the door. We're picking the next book tonight, she said. Any nominations? Wes looked at me. Your turn, he said. Pick something. I paused. Thought about all the books we'd read together. The hard ones. The heavy ones. The ones that left us feeling gutted. Then I smiled. Red, white, and royal blue. Claire raised an eyebrow. A romance? Yeah, I said. I think we've earned one. Wes chuckled beside me. And for the first time, he reached over and laced his fingers with mine right there, in front of everyone. No one said a thing. And somehow, that silence felt like applause. Reading a romance with the group was a shift. There were fewer long silences, fewer carefully phrased takes. People smiled more, laughed, talked about things like joy, which felt new and kind of radical in a group that usually discussed trauma and literary metaphors. And Wes? He leaned into it. He didn't even try to act cool or detached. He had opinions. About pacing, about character arcs, about how the close scenes were actually pretty damn well written for once. When Claire asked if the relationship in the book felt believable, he said it felt like something that started by accident and became inevitable, which honestly is how the best ones happen. Then he looked at me, quick, barely noticeable. But I noticed. After the meeting, we didn't head to the bar or to his place. We just walked. It was still cold out, our breaths visible in the air, the street quiet. At one point, he took my glove off and held my bare hand in his, slipping our fingers together without saying anything. I glanced over, and he was already watching me. I keep thinking about how none of this was supposed to happen, he said. You joining the club, me showing up that night, us sitting across from each other. I know. He stopped walking, pulled me a little closer. And now, he said, voice soft, I don't really know what I'd do without it. I didn't say anything right away. Just stood there, watching him. The way the streetlight hit his face, the way his breath curled in the cold, the way he was finally letting me see everything. Wes, I said quietly, yeah? I love you. His eyes flickered, not with panic, not with fear, just surprise, like he hadn't expected to hear it out loud yet, but part of him already knew. I love you too, he said, and it didn't feel like a line. It didn't feel like a movie moment. It felt like something that had been true for a while, just waiting to be named. Spring came slowly. The snow melted. The city thawed. Trees bloomed on sidewalks that had been gray for too long. Wes moved in, not with a dramatic conversation or a key exchange, but gradually. A drawer here. A plant there. One day he brought over a worn paperback and said, "Can I leave this?" And I said, "Leave whatever you want," and neither of us said anything else. And just like that, he was there. In the mornings, in the evenings, in all the little spaces that had felt too quiet before. We still went to book club, still took long walks after, still argued sometimes about what counts as literary fiction, or whether the protagonist in whatever novel we were reading was actually redeemable. But those arguments ended with smiles now, or hands brushing knees, or a whispered, "You're wrong, but I like you anyway." One night, curled up on the couch, I asked him, "You ever think about how none of this would have happened if Maya hadn't forced me to sign up?" He nodded. "You ever think about how I almost didn't show up that first night?" "All the time." He looked at me, serious for a second. "I think about it too, how close I came to missing this, to missing you." I kissed him, slow, soft, and I thought, not for the first time, how wrong I'd been when I walked into that first meeting, when I saw him slouched in the back of the room and assumed he didn't belong. Because the truth was, he belonged more than anyone, especially to me.